Princess Lyra stood at the massive window of her private chambers aboard the Imperial Palace station, watching the 3 moons of her homeworld dance across the night sky. Her tall, slender frame cast a long shadow, and her silvery skin caught the starlight. The subtle markings on her face, a sign of her royal bloodline, shifted color with her thoughts, currently a deep blue of contemplation. She held a data tablet, reviewing the latest marriage proposal from another noble house. This was the 15th such offer this cycle, and like all the others, it was filled with logical arguments about genetic compatibility, political advantages, and resource consolidation. Lyra deleted it with a simple gesture, her lip curling in what her tutors would call an unfortunate human mannerism she had picked up from diplomatic meetings. Your Highness, her chief advisor, Master Reed, entered after the door chimed. The Emperor requests your presence in the Grand Strategy Chamber. Lyra turned, her ceremonial robes flowing like liquid metal. Another lecture about my duties to the bloodline. No doubt. Your father merely wishes what is best for the Empire, Reed said, his own facial markings pulsing with cautious yellow light. The annual Galactic Summit approaches, and you will be expected to represent our people with dignity and logic. Lyra finished, having heard this speech countless times. To demonstrate why we are the most advanced civilization in known space. She walked past Reed, her steps measured and precise. The corridors of the station hummed with energy, servants and officials bowing as she passed. Every face she saw wore the same mask of calculated efficiency that her people prided themselves on. In the Grand Strategy Chamber, Emperor Thane stood before a holographic display of their territory. His massive frame dwarfed everyone else in the room, his facial markings a steady green of authority. Daughter, he rumbled, you continue to reject suitable matches. They offer nothing of value. Lyra replied, taking her place beside him. Their genetic variations are within standard parameters. Their resources are adequate, but not exceptional. Their political influences. This is not about mere statistics. Thane interrupted, surprising her. The people need to see their future empress as committed to our ways. These emotional displays of yours, this distaste for logical partnerships, it concerns the High Council. Lyra's markings flashed red for a moment before she controlled herself. Emotional displays. I make decisions based on pure reason. The fact that I find these proposals boring is not emotional. It is a calculated assessment of their value. A junior advisor coughed softly, earning sharp looks from everyone. Lyra knew what they whispered about her. The princess who found no one worthy. The heir who questioned traditions. The one who had picked up too many alien mannerisms during her diplomatic missions. The Galactic Summit begins in 3 cycles, Thane said. Representatives from all major species will attend, including, he paused, his markings showing brief distaste, the humans. They are a young species, but their innovation rate is remarkable, Lyra said. We would be foolish to dismiss them. Their innovation comes from their chaos, Reed interjected. They embrace disorder, emotion, the logical attachments. And yet they've achieved in centuries what took us millennia. Lyra countered. Perhaps there is something to be learned. Enough, Thane commanded. You will attend the summit. You will demonstrate why our way, the path of pure logic and order, is superior. And you will consider the proposals I have selected with the attention they deserve. Lyra bowed, the perfect image of an obedient daughter. But as she left the chamber, her markings swirled with colors that would have shocked the court. Determination, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name. She had studied humans in detail, preparing for the summit. Their chaos, as Reed called it, held a strange fascination for her. Not that she would ever admit it. In her chambers, she looked again at the moons and allowed herself a small smile. The summit would at least be interesting. She had no idea just how right she was about that. The Galactic Summit's opening ceremony filled the massive Grand Hall of Unity Station with representatives from 100 worlds. Lyra watched from her elevated position as species of all shapes and sizes filed in, her facial markings maintaining a proper shade of diplomatic neutrality. Her attention, however, kept drifting to the human delegation. James Miller stood out among his fellow Earth representatives, not because of any physical distinction, but because of how he carried himself. While the others seemed properly awed by the grandeur around them, he looked genuinely delighted, like a child discovering something wonderful. It was most undignified, and yet Lyra couldn't stop watching him. "The human delegation approaches, Your Highness," Reed whispered beside her. "Remember, minimal interaction is recommended. Their emotional nature can be infectious." James led his group forward, stopping at the perfect diplomatic distance. His bow was flawless, showing months of preparation, but his smile was entirely natural. "Princess Lyra, your reputation for brilliance reaches even Earth. Though I must say, the reports didn't mention you would literally glow." Lyra's markings flickered with surprise before she could control them. No one usually commented on her bioluminescence so directly. "Mr. Miller, Earth's achievements have not gone unnoticed either, though your species' tendency toward informal speech remains consistent." Instead of being offended, James actually chuckled. "Guilty as charged. But isn't honest communication better than hiding behind formal words? Your markings just told me more than 100 diplomatic phrases could." Several nearby diplomats gasped softly. Reed's markings flashed warning red. But before Lyra could deliver the cutting response she had prepared, James continued speaking. "For example, right now they're showing patterns I've studied. You're intrigued and annoyed at the same time. It's fascinating how your species evolved such beautiful ways of expressing emotions you claim not to value." "We express status and logical states," Lyra corrected him, fighting to keep her markings steady. "Nothing so primitive as emotions." Of course, James smiled again, and she had the disturbing feeling he was seeing right through her carefully constructed diplomatic mask. "Then shall we discuss the trade proposal? I have some ideas that might surprise you." The next hour proved him right. In the private conference room, James presented a trade deal that combined Earth's chaos and creativity with her people's love of order. His understanding of both cultures showed deep study, but it was the way he presented it that kept catching Lyra off guard. "See, if we combine your quantum manufacturing with our entertainment industry," he explained, gesturing enthusiastically, "we could create experiences that neither of our species has ever imagined. Art that changes based on the viewer's thoughts, music that adapts to individual neural patterns." "That would be highly inefficient," Lyra argued, but found herself leaning forward despite her words. "The resource allocation alone would pay for itself in 6 months, James finished, sliding his data pad over. "I did the calculations using your own economic models. But more importantly, it would bring our peoples closer together. Understanding leads to peace. Peace leads to prosperity." "You quote our own philosophers at us now." "I quote wisdom wherever I find it," he said simply. "Your culture has so much beauty in it, Princess. Sometimes I think you're so focused on being perfect, you forget to be amazing." Lyra stood abruptly, her markings swirling with colors she didn't want to analyze. "This meeting is concluded. Submit your proposal through proper channels, Mr. Miller." As she strode out, she heard him call after her. "Looking forward to tomorrow's session, Princess. I have more surprises for you." In her private chambers later, Lyra found herself repeatedly reviewing the meeting. James Miller was disrupting her carefully ordered world with his smiles and his insights, and his infuriating ability to see past her defenses. The worst part was, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted him to stop. "Computer," she said finally, "access all available files on human diplomatic practices, and include their cultural documents about personal interaction as well." She told herself it was purely for diplomatic preparation. The slight color shift in her markings suggested otherwise. The Joint Trade Committee meeting was not going as planned. Lyra sat at the head of the conference table, watching James play what he called classical music through the room's audio system. Other diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but she found herself strangely moved by the rising and falling notes. This piece is called Moonlight Sonata, James explained, his eyes closed as he listened. Written by a human composer named Beethoven hundreds of years ago. Tell me, princess, what do your markings show when you hear it? Lyra suddenly realized her facial patterns were shifting through shades she rarely displayed in public. She quickly tried to control them, but James had already noticed. Fascinating, he said softly. Those colors, they match the emotional progression of the piece perfectly. This is highly irregular, Reed interrupted, his own markings showing clear disapproval. We are here to discuss the manufacturing treaty, not waste time on primitive entertainment. But this is relevant, James insisted. How can we create joint entertainment ventures if we don't understand how each species experiences art? Princess, your people's quantum technology could revolutionize how we share experiences like this. Lyra found herself nodding before she could stop. The neural response patterns are intriguing. Perhaps a small test project. Your Highness, Reed cut in sharply. May I remind you of your father's instructions regarding limited cultural exchange? The music faded away, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Lyra stood, her robes shimming with the movement. Mr. Miller, while your presentation is unique, we must focus on practical matters. But James wasn't done surprising her. He pulled out a small device and placed it on the table. Then let me show you something practical. A hologram sprang to life, showing a complex molecular structure. This is a new medical compound our scientists developed. It's effective, but unstable. We believe your quantum manufacturing process could solve that problem. In return, we're offering complete access to our entertainment technology database. Medical compounds can be acquired elsewhere, Reed dismissed. Not like this one, James said quietly. It treats a condition that affects 15% of your population, the neural degradation that occurs in your elders, causing them to lose control of their markings. Lyra's breath caught. Her grandmother had suffered from that condition. The memory of those final days, when the proud woman's markings had flickered randomly like a broken light, still haunted her. How did you know about that? She demanded. James met her gaze steadily. I did my research, princess, just as you've been researching human culture. Yes, I noticed the access logs to our cultural database. We're both curious about each other's worlds, aren't we? Reed stood up, markings flashing danger signals. This meeting is over. Princess, your father will hear about this inappropriate behavior. But Lyra remained seated, studying James thoughtfully. No, Reed. We will hear the rest of Mr. Miller's proposal. She turned to James. Though I warn you, trying to manipulate me through emotional appeals will not work. I wouldn't dream of it, James smiled. I'm simply suggesting that both our peoples have something the other needs. We need your technology and stability. You need our creativity, and he paused. Then finished softly, our understanding that progress sometimes requires change. The rest of the meeting was purely technical, discussing manufacturing processes and distribution networks. But Lyra found her thoughts kept returning to the music, to the way it had made her feel, and to the fact that this human had somehow seen past her careful defenses to understand what would matter to her people. Later, alone in her quarters, she found herself humming the melody of the sonata. Her markings shifted to match the music's rhythm. And for once, she didn't try to stop them. Computer, she said finally, download the complete works of Beethoven. For cultural research purposes only. The computer complied silently, but Lyra's markings betrayed the truth. She was starting to see the universe through very different eyes. The emergency alarms blared through Unity Station, their harsh sound cutting through the usual quiet hum of machinery. Lyra ran through the corridors, her markings pulsing with alert patterns as she followed the security feeds on her neural link. The terrorist group had struck during the summit's main reception, targeting the station's gravity controls. Status report, she commanded, entering the emergency control center. Multiple explosions in the lower sectors, a technician reported, his markings showing controlled panic. The gravity fields are destabilizing. We have delegates trapped in Reception Hall B. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment. That was where James had been heading for his presentation on Earth's cultural exchange program. Without thinking about protocol, she turned and ran toward the affected sector. "Your Highness, you cannot." Reed's voice echoed behind her. "The area is unstable." She ignored him, her royal guard struggling to keep up as she moved with the enhanced speed her species was known for. The corridors became more chaotic as she approached the damaged section. Emergency fields flickered, trying to contain the failing gravity. Through the transparent walls, she could see debris floating in sections where gravity had already failed. Then she saw them. A group of delegates trapped behind a sealed emergency door. James was there, helping a fallen Centaurian ambassador. "The door controls are fried," a security officer reported. "We can't override from here." Lyra studied the situation. The gravity was fluctuating dangerously in that section. If it failed completely while the structural damage spread. James looked up and saw her through the door. Even in this crisis, he managed a small smile, though she could see the concern in his eyes. He pointed to a manual release panel on his side of the door. "That panel is in a zero-gravity pocket," the security officer warned. "Anyone trying to reach it would be exposed to space if the whole breach spreads." Lyra's markings shifted to decision purple. "Evacuate this corridor." "That's an order." "Princess." Reed had caught up, breathing hard. "Your life is too valuable to risk." "Which is exactly what they want everyone to think," she cut him off. "That we value pure logic and self-preservation above all else." She began removing her outer robes, leaving her in the more practical inner suit. Sometimes the most logical choice is to take a risk. Before anyone could stop her, she hit the emergency override on their side. The door to the damaged section opened, and she pushed off, using her species' natural agility to navigate the zero-gravity space. Debris floated past her as she made her way to the panel. A piece of metal sliced her arm, but she ignored the pain. Her markings glowed with concentration and something else. Fear, yes, but also determination. She reached the panel just as a warning screech indicated the whole breach was spreading. Her fingers flew over the controls, trying to reactivate the emergency systems. Nothing happened. Then James was there beside her, having used a piece of floating debris as a makeshift propulsion device. "The circuits are damaged," he said quickly. "But if we were route through the secondary systems." Together, they worked on the panel, his knowledge of Earth's similar systems complementing her understanding of the station's technology. The hull groaned ominously. "Almost," James muttered, and then the panel lit up. The emergency door slid open, and the trapped delegates began evacuating. But before either of them could move, a violent gravity fluctuation hit. James grabbed Lyra and pushed her toward the safe zone, but the movement sent him spinning toward the damaged hull section. Without hesitation, Lyra used her superior strength to snag his arm and pull him to safety, just as the emergency field snapped back into place. They landed in a heap in the safe corridor, breathing hard. Lyra's markings were wild with colors she didn't even try to control. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she managed to say. James laughed weakly. "I thought your people didn't believe in bravery, just logical action." Perhaps she helped him up, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "I'm learning that some things transcend pure logic." The crisis was contained, but something fundamental had shifted between them. And for the first time in her life, Lyra wasn't sure she wanted to analyze it logically. Lyra sat in her private garden aboard Unity Station, surrounded by carefully cultivated plants from 100 worlds. In her hands was an ancient Earth book, actual paper and binding, a gift from James. Poetry, he called it. She had been reading it in secret for days, her markings shifting with each new verse she discovered. "I carry your heart with me," she read softly, the words strange yet somehow perfect on her tongue. Her markings rippled with colors she had never shown before, colors that would have scandalized the royal court. "Your Highness," Reed's voice interrupted her thoughts. She quickly hid the book, but not before her advisor saw it. His markings showed clear disapproval. The Emperor requests your presence. There are concerns about your recent behavior. Lyra stood, smoothing her robes. What concerns? Your markings have been displaying unauthorized pattern variations. You've been spending an excessive amount of time studying human culture. And the incident during the terrorist attack, where I saved dozens of lives, including several key allies, she challenged. Where you risked the royal bloodline for a human, Reed corrected. Your father is worried you're becoming compromised. The walk to the Emperor's chambers was long, giving Lyra time to think. She had changed, yes, but was it compromise or growth? The poetry she'd been reading spoke of truths her people had forgotten, or perhaps feared. Emperor Thane stood at his usual spot by the Starview window. His markings were steady, controlled, everything a royal should be. Daughter, he began, explain yourself. You'll need to be more specific, father. Very well. He activated a holo display, showing her markings color patterns over the past weeks. These variations are unprecedented. You're displaying emotional responses that haven't been seen in our bloodline for generations. Perhaps they shouldn't have been suppressed, Lyra said quietly. The Emperor's markings flashed with shock. You suggest our ancestors were wrong. That generations of careful breeding and control should be discarded because of your fascination with humans. Not discarded. Lyra stepped forward. Enhanced. Father, look at what humans have accomplished by embracing both logic and emotion. Their art, their music, their literature, it all feeds into their innovation. They don't just solve problems, they imagine new possibilities. And you imagine what, daughter? A future where our people abandon control, where we let emotions rule us like primitives. I imagine a future where we're not afraid to feel. Lyra's markings blazed with conviction, where we can be both logical and passionate, where we can learn from other species instead of looking down on them. She pulled out the book of poetry. Listen to this, father, really listen. And she began to read, her markings matching the rhythm of the words, creating patterns of light and color that filled the chamber. For a moment, just a moment, she saw her father's markings respond, showing colors she'd never seen from him before. Then he turned away. You will cease this investigation of human culture, he commanded. The summit ends in 3 days. After that, you will return home and begin proper preparation for your role as future empress. And if I refuse? The Emperor turned back, his markings now showing steel resolve. Then perhaps you are not fit for the throne. Lyra straightened, her own markings steady. The throne exists to serve our people, father. If we cannot evolve, if we cannot grow, then we do not serve. We only preserve. She left his chambers with her head high, though her hearts were pounding. In her own rooms, she took out the poetry book again, but this time she didn't hide it when Reed entered. Your Highness, he began, the Emperor has ordered. I know what he ordered. She cut him off. But tell me, Reed, have you ever wondered why we fear emotion so much? What are we really afraid of? Reed's markings showed confusion, then, just briefly, curiosity. Lyra smiled. Perhaps change was possible, one person at a time. She opened the book again, her markings glowing with colors of hope and determination. The next few days would define not just her future, but possibly her entire species. And somewhere in the station, a human diplomat was waiting to see what she would choose. The final day of the summit dawned with tension filling Unity Station. News of Princess Lyra's clash with the Emperor had spread, despite efforts to contain it. Delegates whispered in corridors, their conversations stopping whenever she passed. Lyra found James in the station's observation deck, watching the swirling gases of a nearby nebula. Her markings betrayed her presence before she could speak, shifting to colors that she now recognized as joy. They're forcing you to make a choice, aren't they? He asked without turning. My father has given me until sunset, she replied, moving to stand beside him. Either I reject these new ideas and return home to be the proper heir, or you lose everything you were born to be, James finished. His hand moved slightly, almost touching hers, then withdrew. I'm sorry. I never meant to cause such trouble. You didn't cause anything. Lyra's markings flashed with intensity. You just showed me what I'd been afraid to see. Our people have locked away so much of ourselves, thinking it made us stronger. A group of royal guards appeared at the deck's entrance, led by Reed. Your Highness, the Emperor demands your presence for the closing ceremony. Tell my father I'll be there shortly, she said, her voice steady despite her swirling markings. The human cannot attend, Reed added. By royal decree, Earth's delegation has been limited. James straightened, more like confined to quarters. My government received the diplomatic protest an hour ago. They're recalling me to Earth. Lyra's markings flared with colors of protest and pain. They can't. They can, he said gently. And they're right to, from their perspective. A human diplomat causing a royal succession crisis. It's not exactly good for interstellar relations. She turned to him fully then, not caring who saw her markings display. You taught me that emotions aren't weakness. That feeling deeply means caring deeply, and that makes us stronger, not weaker. And you taught me that logic and feeling aren't enemies, he smiled sadly. Your people could lead the galaxy into a new age of understanding, if they'd only allow themselves to feel it. Reed cleared his throat. Your Highness, we must go. Lyra stood straight, every inch the royal hair. No, Princess. I said no. Her markings blazed with authority. Summon the full council. If my father wants me to choose, I will choose. But I will do it before all our people. The council chamber was packed, delegates from every world cramming in to witness what everyone knew would be a historic moment. Emperor Thane sat on his throne, his markings rigid with controlled anger. Lyra walked to the center of the chamber, her steps measured. But instead of wearing traditional robes, she wore a simple suit that showed her markings clearly. They swirled with colors both old and new, logic and emotion in harmony. Father, council members, honored delegates, she began. For generations, we have prided ourselves on our logic, our control, our superiority. But I stand before you today to ask, what has it cost us? She held up her hands, letting her markings flow freely. We are beings of light and color, yet we hide our true selves. We are capable of deep thought and deep feeling, yet we deny half of who we are. The chamber erupted in murmurs as her markings displayed patterns many had never seen before. Even her father leaned forward, his own markings showing unexpected response. I choose, Lyra's voice rang out, to be whole, to be both heir and innovator, to lead our people not into stagnation, but into growth. She turned to where James stood with the Earth delegation. And I choose to learn from those we once thought beneath us, because true strength lies not in isolation, but in connection. The choice had been made. Now she could only wait to see if her people were ready to change with her. Silence filled the council chamber after Lyra's declaration. Then, slowly, something remarkable happened. The younger council members' markings began to shift, showing colors they had long suppressed. Like a wave of light, the change spread through the chamber. Emperor Thane rose from his throne, his own markings flickering between traditional patterns and new colors. You challenge millennia of tradition, daughter. I challenge our fear, father, Lyra replied. Her markings glowed with determination and hope. Look around you. Even now, our people show their true nature. We don't have to choose between logic and emotion. We can embrace both. James stepped forward, despite the guards' attempts to stop him. Your Highness, if I may speak. The Emperor's markings flashed warning, but Lyra nodded. Let him speak. Let us truly listen for once. In Earth's history, James began, we once thought we had to choose between progress and tradition, between thinking and feeling. We nearly destroyed ourselves with that false choice. But when we learned to combine both, that's when we reached the stars. Whispers spread through the chamber as delegates processed his words. Reed, surprisingly, was the first to respond. "Princess," he said, his markings showing previously hidden patterns, "I have served the throne for 3 generations. I have never seen our people so alive." More voices joined in, some in support, some in protest. The chamber's lights reflected off their markings, creating a dancing aurora of emotions and thoughts combined. Lyra moved to stand before her father. "You taught me to put our people first. This is how we do that. Not by remaining frozen in time, but by growing, learning, feeling." The Emperor studied her, his markings gradually shifting to show colors she remembered from her childhood, before royal training had taught him to suppress them. "The throne cannot be ruled by emotion alone," he said finally. "No," Lyra agreed, "but it cannot be ruled by pure logic either. We need both, Father. We always have." She turned to face the chamber, her markings blazing like a new star. "I propose a new way forward. Let us create a council of both traditional leaders and those who dare to feel. Let us learn from humans and other species while maintaining our own identity. Let us be whole again." The chamber erupted in light as markings flashed and swirled. But now, instead of chaos, there was harmony, logic and emotion dancing together, like the cosmic forces that had shaped their world. James watched in awe as the revolution unfolded not with violence or force, but with understanding and acceptance. His eyes met Lyra's across the chamber, and both knew that something far larger than their personal connection had been set in motion. The Emperor raised his hands, his markings finally settling into a pattern that combined old and new. "The crown recognizes the wisdom in change," he announced. "Princess Lyra will lead the Transition Council, with advisors from all worlds, including Earth." Hours later, as the delegates celebrated the historic moment, Lyra found James in their spot on the observation deck. "Your people are amazing," he said softly. "Once they allowed themselves to feel, they transformed so quickly." "We had a good teacher," she replied, her markings showing colors that needed no translation. "What happens now?" James asked. Lyra's markings rippled with amusement. "Now we build something new. Together." She held out her hand, and this time, when his fingers touched hers, neither pulled away. Above them, the nebula's gases continued their eternal dance of order and chaos, logic and emotion, just as they had always done. And on Unity Station, a princess who had once laughed at love stood hand in hand with the human who had helped her find not just her heart, but her people's soul. The revolution wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now it would proceed with both wisdom and passion, thought and feeling, creating a future brighter than any single species could have imagined alone.